Today on the show, I had Greg Lawrence. Greg is a psychedelic integration specialist out of California, and we talked about what exactly a psychedelic integration specialist is, how he guides people through these psychedelic experiences. We talked about microdosing and his personal experiences with psychedelics as well. So I hope you enjoy the show. Greg, how's your day going?
Great. How about you?
Hey, it's going good. Just getting started.
Yeah, same here. Went out for a
Yeah,
walk, ready to start the day.
nice. What area are you in?
I am in San Fernando Valley. Where are you, by the way?
I'm in Phoenix.
Okay, so I'm in San Fernando Valley, suburb of Los Angeles.
Okay, so you guys are in pretty strict lockdown over there, huh?
Yeah, we're under recommendations to stay inside whenever possible. You know, you got to maintain physical distance when you go to the store, and you're supposed to wear a mask when you go outside if you're going to encounter anybody.
Yeah. How do you feel about that whole situation?
You know, I figure with everything flying around, there's two choices. Maybe I can do what these people say and I might feel foolish later if they're wrong, or maybe I'll get sick and die, and I'll pick being foolish if it comes down to it.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy.
When the possibilities of me getting someone else sick, then I'm going to take every precaution I can just in case.
Nice. So, you're a psychic integration specialist. What exactly is that?
I am a psychedelic integration coach, so in that I have a couple of functions. One is to work with people before a psychedelic experience, and those might be people who have no experience with psychedelics, so they might have a want to get an idea of what they might expect, how to stay grounded, navigate, what to do if things get unpleasant or they become scared, basically how to make the most out of the experience. And the same thing goes for people who have experience with psychedelics. And we'll do a couple of things. Sometimes we unpack that person's past and present because a lot of people are coming to psychedelics because they have some issue or condition that they're working through. It might be some childhood issue. They might feel stuck or held back, or they might have something like OCD, anxiety, depression, or something along those lines. So we'll look at what might have caused that and where they are today, and then we'll go into the preparation about how to handle the experience and how to get the most out of it. On the other end,
Yeah.
I deal with a couple of different kind of people. Sometimes people have a bad experience and they find me. They feel a little ungrounded. They're feeling isolated from people. They don't understand why they saw, heard, or felt the things that they did. So we try to put some context around that and get them grounded. And a lot of people come to me because they want to understand what the lesson is that they got from the psychedelic experience. And there's always a lesson or a theme in there, and what to do with that, how to integrate it. And integrating that means taking the lesson and doing something in your everyday life so that you have changed somehow. That's a way of taking the experience with you. There's a message about what you need to do next in your life, and there are ways to go about that. So we talk about what that is, and then we come up with some sort of action plan for making some change, shift, or adjustment in someone's life. And sometimes that's very mundane. It can be changing a particular habit. It can be being better about something. It might be a shift in attitude or the way that you communicate, not being so bothered about things. There are a lot of different shapes it takes. But as a coach, I work with people preparing them for the psychedelic experience and then helping them to integrate that experience afterwards.
Nice. So how exactly did you really get started on that?
Well, I use psychedelics in my late teens into my late 20s in a sort of a recreational capacity. And I have no problem with people using psychedelics recreationally, but I unfortunately got mixed up with hard drugs at the time, and my life kind of spiraled out of control. So I moved away from the area I was in. I pulled myself out of where I was. I basically went cold turkey and I stopped using all substances, including psychedelics, except for cannabis that I had a not so great relationship with for about 20 years. I was almost a daily cannabis smoker. And about 6 years ago, I had a personal tragedy happen. My life was turned upside down. And I realized there was a lot of childhood trauma I hadn't dealt with. So I started seeing a therapist. I got a coach. And somewhere in there, I experimented with psychedelics again and realized there was a lot more to it. I had some very profound experiences, and I thought that those would change me as a person. But I found that, within a few weeks or so, I was back where I started. So I discovered the concept of integration and I studied it and I went and I found an integration circle and started asking questions and talking to people and integrating those experiences myself. And I basically turned myself around and I really changed my life and changed as a person about 6 years ago. So In those integration circles, I was asked eventually if I would facilitate those circles, which I still do to this day out here in Los Angeles. And then one of the people who was a coach there asked me if I would see some clients that she had because I was good at integration. I started doing that, and I got a certification as an integration coach, and I've been doing that for over 2 years now. I basically do it because it's something that helped me, and I like seeing it help other people.
What exactly is an integration circle?
Integration circles are, well, they were in person meetings. Now they are online, but let's talk about the old days where people would get together in a room. And it's a safe space where people can ask questions, do research, talk about experiences, and get support from other people, and basically like a community gathering. So we'll have anywhere from 5 to 30 people in a room. There'll be new people asking questions about what is microdosing, or should I take this? People talk about a good or bad experience they had. They'll ask for advice from other people. It's basically a safe space where people can discuss the psychedelic experience and all the things that go along with it.
Huh. I'm really interested in the aspect of microdosing. What kind of drugs do you recommend microdosing, and how does that help?
Well, I can't necessarily recommend microdosing. I mean, it works for a lot of people, but I do have to say that I'm not encouraging anyone to take illicit substances or engage in illegal behavior. But if people are microdosing, most commonly, people will use magic mushrooms, which contain psilocybin or LSD. Microdosing is consuming small quantities of psychedelics, usually about a tenth of a dose that would give you any kind of a psychoactive response, and using that to make subtle changes within yourself. People use it to address anxiety, depression, OCD. Um, there are people who've used it for things like traumatic brain injury. People use it for creativity, focus, energy, different things. But yeah, there are a couple of different ways to go about it. Most of the time, you're talking about magic mushrooms or LSD when people microdose.
Yeah, definitely. I've read a couple forums where people were microdosing LSD in Silicon Valley to get more creativity. Do you think that would help with that?
That's definitely something that helps people. There are some people, depends on the substance. Some people get more focus, more creativity. Some people don't get along well with microdosing. It's not a panacea, just like psychedelics aren't. But it's definitely been helpful for a lot of people. I do not recommend it, but some people have used the microdosing in conjunction with working with a prescriber or doctor to taper off of like antidepressant medication or so forth, like SSRIs.
I see. And in those kind of instances, do they have to take like tolerance breaks, or do they just keep it throughout the year?
Well, when you're microdosing, if you took a substance like that every day, eventually you will build up a tolerance. So there are protocols that say how often you should microdose that go everywhere from every other day to there's something called the Fadiman protocol developed by James Fadiman, who's a well-known psychedelic researcher and wrote a book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. He's credited with coining the term microdosing for psychedelics. And that recommends that you microdose one day and then take 2 days off and then microdose again. So you might microdose Monday, take off Tuesday, Wednesday, then microdose Thursday. There's a gentleman named Paul Stamets, who's a famed mycologist, who recommends microdosing magic mushrooms 5 days on and 2 days off. Sometimes he says 4 days on and 3 days off. And then there's a general recommendation that at least every few months you take some kind of break.
Okay, yeah. So there is tolerance breaks. Do you like, would it prioritize like your creativity? Is there like a hard time reading and writing while doing this?
No, you should. I should point out that there is some confusion and some sort of blurring of the lines between microdosing, classic microdosing, which is subperceptual, meaning the only thing I feel is maybe good, better, or not as bad, but I don't notice any psychoactive effects. I don't have any visuals. My depth perception's not off. I can drive, things like that. I need to find out what that level is before I start taking it consistently and before I do something like drive. But there is an area called mini dosing where people take a little bit more, where they do feel a little bit. Maybe you shouldn't be driving. You get a little bit of a high from it. Um, and that is a different animal. But in classic microdosing, where you're taking subperceptual doses, you should be fine doing everything that you do daily. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times people forget that they microdosed. They'll just think, I'm having a really good day. And then, oh, that's right, I did a microdose this morning. So it doesn't alter you in any way. It just sort of locks you into what you're doing, lifts your mood a little bit, helps enhance your creativity if it works for you. It doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah. What about on the opposite side of the spectrum? What about megadosing?
Um, well, megadosing obviously is, this is where that line's blurred between mini dosing and microdosing. If you megadose, then you're going to have the opposite of being focused on what you need to do. You're going to be focused on something internally to you, a spot on the wall, whatever you might have. But it's hard to function in everyday life near megadosing.
So I'm assuming like you've taken some of these psychedelics, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay, what's the best experience that you've gotten and what drug was it?
It's hard to say what the best experience I've had is. I mean, I've had some very profound experiences using ayahuasca, using magic mushrooms, using LSD, using small amounts of iboga. All of those have helped me get to places where I realized blocks that I had and places where I was suffering and things that I hadn't dealt with yet that I needed to deal with. And that's kind of what psychedelics do. They do basically what happens in therapy. They help you bring the unconscious to the conscious. And that's not always comfortable. But there are things that we're suffering over that we're trying not to look at and trying not to face. And we need to look at those things before we can get better.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
psychedelics have helped me do. They've helped me see things that have happened in my past as just things that happened in my past. They've helped me to see that I was not to blame for things that I might have blamed myself for. They've helped me have compassion for myself and others, and they've helped me get over things that were holding me back.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always been interested really in ayahuasca and DMT.
Those are very, ayahuasca and DMT are very powerful substances.
Yeah, so what was your experience on ayahuasca?
My experience on ayahuasca was, wide and varied. The very first time I took ayahuasca, there's a strange thing about ayahuasca, and sometimes the first time people take it, they won't feel anything psychoactive. In my case, I took it, I started having a very strong experience for about 30 minutes, and then it just suddenly stopped. And I was kind of upset that it happened. It should have lasted for hours. But, in the time that I was sitting there being upset over about 30 or 40 minutes, I learned a couple of very important lessons that I probably wouldn't have learned had that not happened to me.
Yeah, what kind of lessons were those?
Well, the first was that I was sitting there. This was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and there were several people there conducting the ceremony, the facilitator and the people who were helping him out, the curanderos. And all of them were playing musical instruments and playing icaros, the songs that were designed to go with ayahuasca that were originated in the Amazonian jungle, and they were playing very unique instruments I had not seen before, and it was um, something I'd never seen before, and yet I was looking out a window, sort of pissed off that something hadn't happened that I wanted to happen, and I realized that I was missing what was happening in front of me because I was worried about something that didn't happen that I couldn't possibly go back and change. In that moment, that was a very profound lesson for me. So I cultivated a little bit more of an attitude or enjoying what was in front of me and not being upset about what didn't happen in the past. The second thing was that it was very cold in the room. My feet were very cold. Now, the facilitator was wearing a short sleeve shirt and didn't have shoes on. And in my mind, I was thinking that this guy should turn the heat on or do something. I was thinking, well, he's not cold, so he doesn't care. He should do something about the heat. I was really upset about it. And I finally realized that I could sit on my feet. I could wrap another blanket around them. There were several things I could do to stop my feet from being cold. But in that moment, I realized that there is something that I had been doing for a long, long time and never even realized it. And that was if I thought that someone should fix something, whether or not I could do it myself, not only would I be upset about that person not fixing it, I would suffer in order to prove that that was happening. So I would sit there with my feet being cold and not warm them up to prove that that guy should do something about my feet being cold and be upset about it. That was a valuable lesson.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's really profound.
Yeah, it actually is very deep, very
Yeah,
simple,
yeah.
straightforward lesson. And in that moment, I realized I have been doing this for years and years. I have been upset about something and suffering in order to keep being upset to prove that I was right.
I see. And so playing these musical instruments and having like a ceremony, is that what a guided psychedelic experience is?
Well, there's a difference between something like an ayahuasca ceremony, where there are songs being sung to uh, the participants, and those might be, anywhere from 2 or 3 to 20 people in a room with some other people to help them out and play songs. Songs are sung to make specific things happen and help things when when things get difficult. And a psychedelic journey is more, a guided journey is more of a one-on-one experience where you are sitting with the person who is holding space for you. And in the classic guided journey, you might have, headphones and eye shades on where music is being played. But the guides don't necessarily guide you to go in a particular place in a guided psychedelic experience. I mean, if we knew where to guide you, we wouldn't need psychedelic substances. These things know more than we do about what we need to do in order to get better.
Yeah. So have you tried any like anything beyond that, like maybe like a sensory deprivation tank or an light or anything kind of like that?
Yeah, I've used sensory deprivation tanks. I've used extensive meditation. I've altered my consciousness in more than one way. But there is nothing quite like the experience of having a psychedelic come in and sort of illuminate things that you haven't seen before.
I see. So if someone was wanting to get into that, where would they exactly start?
Well, there are places that people can dip their toe in the water before they go into a psychedelic experience if they'd like to know what it's like. One of those is something like holotropic breath work, which can be very psychedelic. This is a sort of a hyperventilation, a facilitated hyperventilation in a certain setting where someone guides you through breath work, and that gets very deep. There are also psychedelic cannabis experiences. There's a gentleman by the name of Daniel McQueen who runs an organization called Medicinal Mindfulness in Boulder, Colorado, and he holds something called conscious cannabis circles and teaches people how to hold these. And those are experiences where you partake of cannabis, a particular blend that he's come up with, and particular strains. You smoke quite a bit of it, and then you are eyes closed with music playing. And I've gone through that, and that's a very psychedelic experience. But people can get an idea of what psychedelics are like through cannabis or breath work, if that's something they'd like to investigate. If they decide to go further than that, then I usually say that if someone is going to do this, I always recommend that they are as safe as possible. So if it's your first time, I would recommend at least having a sitter with you, someone who understands the psychedelic experience, someone who won't interfere in your experience, and someone who understands what it's like to hold space for you, meaning just being there and letting you have your experience without judgment or trying to fix it. And if I were going to have, if someone were in some place where it was not illegal and they were asking me what was the safest substance, psilocybin is one of the safest substances that you can take. There are more ER visits and more 911 calls for cannabis than there are for psilocybin every year. It's an extremely safe substance when correct precautions are taken and someone's in a safe environment.
So do you see psilocybin or shrooms as being better than LSD, or what exactly are the differences between the two?
I don't think that one is better. One of the reasons, I think that there's a lot of similarity between LSD and mushrooms. I feel myself that mushrooms are a little bit more heart based, a little bit more earth based, and LSD is a little bit more cerebral, but they have a lot of similarities. The reason that I choose one over the other for beginners would be because mushrooms will last 4 to 6 hours and LSD can last 8 to 12 hours or more. And when you are just starting off, sometimes when you get to 3 or 4 hours, you're about done. And
Yeah.
having another 8 hours ahead of you is not always a good idea if you're just starting off with something. LSD, there's a little bit of an investment in LSD. You have to know that it's going to be a while.
Yeah. And is this something that you see overall that has that has benefited your life and can benefit other people's lives?
It has absolutely benefited my life. And the reason that I work with people in this work is because, I like helping people to transform. I do coaching in addition to psychedelic integration coaching just to help people in their lives, people who are stuck, people who want to get to the next level, people who are on a spiritual path. But the use of psychedelics along with coaching and therapy and on a path of personal development has absolutely transformed my life. I mean, I'm a different person than I was 6 years ago. I used to be a very angry and impatient person. I was not very good in relationships. I was in a bad spot with a lot of my family. All of that's been turned around, thanks largely in part to the work that I've done on myself, and with psychedelics as part of that. For me, psychedelics have been part of a path of personal and spiritual development, and a very important component in that path.
I see. How has it spiritually developed you?
I have had experiences where, I had a view that I and everyone around me were basically God and part of God. But I have had experiences on psychedelics where I have felt the presence of something much larger than me, and felt a communication and a touch from something beyond me. So I will say that my belief has shifted somewhat to know that it's not just me and everyone else. There is something quite larger than me outside of me. And I'm
Yeah,
also, quite convinced now that this is not the first incarnation that I've been through, and it's definitely not going to be the last. When I pass from this incarnation, it's just another transition.
I see. So have you adopted more of like kind of like a Buddhist belief where like you reincarnate and then you kind of escape from that?
I do believe that I will reincarnate. I do believe that we are here to learn lessons, and that once you learn those lessons, you won't have to go through that in your next life. So I think
Interesting.
it sort of elevates a little bit every time you go through a little bit of suffering. You learn something about it.
Yeah, that's always an interesting view. A lot of people that are spiritual or take psychedelics, I always notice that they kind of think we're all part of like one consciousness or somehow interrelated with each other, and it really shifts them into seeing things from a whole different perspective than what we're used to in like conventional religion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more empowering, I think.
Yeah, I think it
But
kind of makes it more surreal.
yeah, and it's also, use of psychedelics and the path I've been on have also given me an appreciation for other religions. I see religion, Alan Watts said something along the lines of religion should be respected if for no other reason than it should lead one towards virtuousness. So I think that I always appreciate people trying to connect with God in some way. So I think that people conflate organized religion with religion or spirituality, and I think the two are distinctly different. There's a difference between someone being religious and belonging to a particular faith or church and listening to the dogma of that faith, church, or organization, if you will.
So how many people do you usually have in your integration circles?
Integration circles, depending on location, we can have up to 30 people at times. We do those. Well, when we do them is no longer, everything has shifted now that we're in lockdown. It used to be we did them twice a month out here in Santa Monica, twice a month out here in the valley where I live. We have them in downtown Los Angeles, Orange County, the South Bay area. But now basically we have them online 2 or 3 times a week. And those will be online anywhere from, 5 to 20 people again.
Five
And
to
there's
20 people. Do they, when taking these drugs, do they, I don't know, does everyone kind of mind their own business or how does that work?
Well, the integration circles, we don't use any substances. Those are strictly discussion circles.
Oh, I see. I
Yeah,
didn't
they're,
realize that.
yeah. Yeah, that's just a safe space where people can come in and discuss their experiences, ask questions, get support, try to integrate experiences because there's always a facilitator there, like myself or my friend John Saul or someone else.
So, what exactly, if you could describe it, what do you see when you're taking psychedelics?
Um, well, what people see, or it's highly individualized. It has a lot to do with, I think the experience is an amalgamation of everything that's happened to you up to the millisecond that it starts to take effect. But, what you will see is often things from your past. You will see your problems kind of in front of you. You'll see various visuals. It's a highly personalized experience for every person. Nothing is quite the same. You'll get reports of people using DMT or something that has some sort of similarities, but the psychedelic experience in general is pretty diversified and pretty individual.
I see. I've heard people like saying they could feel sound and things like that. Do you think that your senses are heightened?
Oh, I absolutely think your senses are heightened. Psychedelics, most classic psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD will partially cut off blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. That's where I reside, my individual personality, my ego, if you will. They will take off some of the filters in our brain. So right now I'm seeing millions and billions of bits of data all around me, but I just need to focus on the fact that I'm talking to Oscar. So I am necessarily deleting a lot of the things that I see around me. A lot of the things I see, smell, hear, taste are narrowed down so that I get a focus of the world that allows me to, I can't operate by being aware of everything around me on a day to day basis. I need to be able to talk to you and not be distracted by, the texture of the walls around me and so forth. So I delete a lot of information. Psychedelics open up those filters a bit. So when people say things like it was more blue than any blue I've ever seen, or it tasted more like a strawberry than any strawberry I've ever tasted, that's because you actually are getting a little bit more of the world through your senses and through your brain. It's letting more through so that your gestalt of the world is a little bit wider and you're seeing more than you usually do. So, yes, your senses are heightened and the filters or limiters of those senses have been lifted a little bit. And yeah, you talked about synesthesia. So things like hearing sound or hearing colors or seeing sounds and things like that do happen to people. There are charts that show MRI scans of your brain at baseline and your brain on psilocybin mushrooms or LSD, and there are parts of your brain lighting up that are usually dormant, and there are parts of your brain talking to each other that don't even usually act up much. So there's a lot going on inside of your mind that's not usually happening when you're not on one of these substances. There are also things like, there have been studies shown that, for instance, psychedelics and music together take, uh, they transport information from the part of your brain that has personal memories to the part of your brain responsible for things like pictures. So you have music and psychedelics taking your memories and sort of making them into a story for you. And a lot of times, what you'll see in psychedelics are things from your past, and you'll just see them in a little bit different way. You'll get a little bit of perspective shift on something. When you think about things from your past, you automatically are sort of pulled into them or triggered by them. Psychedelics can help take off that trigger so that you can see things from a detached and dispassionate perspective to get a little bit better idea of what actually happened.
I see. So are you saying that it could be an effective treatment towards traumatic experiences in the past?
Well, right now, MDMA, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, um, is in the third stage of clinical trials using MDMA to treat treatment-resistant PTSD in veterans. So in PTSD, it's hard for people to even talk about what happened to them without being triggered and feeling like they're there. That can take years of therapy just to get to that point. Under a guided MDMA experience in the right setting, that is with eye shades and headphones, having a couple of facilitators or therapists there with someone, we're able to see that experience, not get pulled into it, and see that that was something that happened then and that you're okay now. And it's been extremely effective for helping people treat treatment resistant PTSD. And if these trials go well, that will be a prescribable treatment by 2021, 2022 at the latest. Psychedelics are being used to help people treat depression, anxiety, OCD. When I say anxiety, I mean also end of life anxiety. People who have terminal diagnoses who are extremely anxious about the fact they're going to be dying have been helped tremendously by psychedelics. They've helped people with things like alcohol and nicotine addiction. Substances like ibogaine have helped opiate addicts. I personally know someone who had 35 years of bulimia that she was dealing with that ibogaine was successful in treating when nothing else was. So yeah, psychedelics are have been extremely healing for a variety of conditions and a variety of things that bother people.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of veterans that I've seen, they will use marijuana as kind of a way to cope with it. I think psychedelics could be used for the same thing. Do you think that this is a natural thing that our body should be allowed to take in, or do you think it's kind of a thing that we're not used to?
Well, psychedelics have been used in some form or another for thousands and thousands of years. So I think it's certainly part of what humans have been using to connect to themselves, others, and something outside of themselves for eons now. So I wouldn't think it was any more unnatural than anything else that we're using as humans. But there are certainly substances that can help us as humans and help us to heal. Oh, I was just going to say there, we have receptors for these things. LSD, mushrooms, things like that are serotonergic. So they bind to and interact with our serotonin receptors. So they're not unnatural. They're not blocking anything. There's no real harm from taking psychedelics. There are psychedelics you should be careful with. For instance, ibogaine is extremely powerful. It's hard on the liver and it's hard on the heart. So someone who's going to be working with that should have an EKG and a liver panel. But something like psilocybin or LSD done in moderate doses and not done too much, there are no physical side effects of those things. There's no physical harm that comes to people from using psychedelics in those settings.
Yeah, so there's definitely a safe way to do this.
Absolutely. Harm reduction is a big thing of what we're about in the organizations I work with, which is Psychedelia here in Los Angeles and Interspace Integration. I also work with the Transpersonal Counseling Center, which is a psychotherapy practice. But harm reduction is a big part of what we talk about at things like the integration circles. How to stay safe while you're doing this.
Yeah, how would you respond to somebody who says they had a bad trip?
I would want to talk to them about that and find out what it was. Like I said, psychedelics bring the unconscious to the conscious very quickly sometimes, and that can be unpleasant. It can be frightening. And if someone hasn't been prepared sufficiently, they might not understand what's happening. There are also people who should not be doing psychedelics. Those include people who might be schizophrenic, borderline personality disorder, identity disorders, things along those lines. There are people who psychologically are not healthy enough to take psychedelics and people who should not be further untethered from reality. So I think it would depend on it'd be case by case. Is that a person who should have been taking psychedelics in the first place? If they were, then what was the experience they had? What did that mean to them? This is a lot of what I get in integration calls. People who had bad experiences who don't understand them, and sometimes just explaining what might have happened and why they saw, a reason that they might have seen what they saw, felt what they felt, heard what they heard, helps people tremendously.
I see. Do you recommend that someone's first time I mean, you said a sitter, but do you recommend that they get a guide?
That depends on the person. Some people are more suited to a guide. Some people want to have that space. Some people would prefer to try it on their own. But working with a guide is not something I would not recommend to people. It's certainly helpful to a lot of people. I recommend, I have a whole talk that I do on the guided psychedelic journey. And I think that's coming up online on May 19th. But in that, I talk about the things you should look for in a guide, what a guide should do. A guide should be someone who understands preparation and integration afterwards, should be someone who has an understanding of psychology, should be someone who understands intervention, like when to intervene and when not to in your journey, because there are things that should be said to someone and things that should not be said to someone who's under the influence of a psychedelic.
Yeah.
There are times when just let that person have their experience. Should also be someone who understands the substance that you'll be working with. There's a deep understanding of what might be happening to you during the experience.
So you said you were a completely different person before you started down this path. How has it helped you relationship wise or socially wise?
Well, it helped me be less self conscious. It helped me to realize that a lot of the things that I thought in my head about what other people might be thinking, first of all, might not be happening, and second of all, really don't matter. They've helped me to deal with things in my past efficiently, to realize that there were things that I was not responsible for that happened to me, and that I was looking at those through a lens of the person I was at that time. They've helped me psychologically, they've helped me spiritually, they've helped me to be more centered and grounded.
And you mentioned a project May 17th. What exactly is that?
I think it's actually on May 19th. I
May
have a
19th.
presentation that I'm giving online called The Guided Psychedelic Journey.
And
That
what
talks
exactly is
about
that?
that talks about working with the guide, what it's like, what the experience is like. If you were looking for a guide, what kind of questions you might want to ask, what kind of questions they should ask you, what happens during a guided journey. why you would wear eye shades, why you would have headphones, why you would listen to music, um, different settings in which psychedelics can be done, and how those affect the experience. A lot of people who come to the integration circles ask about what it's like to work with a guide. So I finally put together a presentation that sort of nailed down all the questions I've been getting over the years.
That's good. I'll be sure to put that in the description. What kind of music do you usually listen to?
Personally, uh, well, me, I don't know. I'll listen to a variety of music. I might listen to some sort of indigenous music. I don't. I probably won't listen to music that's music. Well, I won't say that. There are times when I just listen to music that I like. That's music I like to listen to. There are times when I listen to things that are more ambient. I might listen to something with um, certain hertz tones or binaural beats or something along those lines. I listen to a wide variety of music and sounds during my experiences. Generally, with psychedelics, this is something that I go into in the presentation. If you're listening to music, it should usually be something that doesn't have discernible lyrics that aren't in a language that you can understand, so that you don't get caught up in the story. Many times it can be ambient. It can be percussive, it can be relaxing, it can be classical. I think there's a wide mix of music that people can and do listen to in psychedelics.
Yeah, you mentioned binaural beats. Do those actually do anything?
I guess that depends on who you ask. It's interesting to listen to them. I'm not sure what kind of lasting effects they might actually have. And I think people should take caution when using psychedelics. They should make sure that they're safe. If this is something that you're going to do for the first time, please do your research. There are places you can go. You can always find integration circles or groups that advocate harm reduction and education, where you can ask questions and learn about different substances. It's not a race. It's not a contest. You don't have to take heroic doses or take some massive dose of psychedelics. You can always do more next time. You can always take more, but once you've taken it, you can't take less. I would just advise people to be cautious and understand that during this experience, there's probably nothing that happens that is not for your healing.
Awesome. Do you have any last words?
You can always find me at Psychedelic Integration Specialist on Facebook and psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com on the web.